Welcome to All Over Entertainment, a place of free thought and free expression. Join me as I share my thoughts and creativity through podcasts, writings, and videos.
Welcome to All Over Entertainment, a podcast where I discuss anything and everything that I would like to talk about that I don't write about on my blog. Today's guest is actually my father, who is a pastor at a local church, Trinity Reformed United Church of Christ. His name is Reverend Steve Hummel. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Like Kyle explained, I'm an ordained minister with the United Church of Christ. I've had 3 pastorates so far, St. Peter's UCC down in Allentown, and then Trinity UCC in Copley, which is just north of Allentown. And I returned back home to Bloomsburg and now pastoring my actual childhood church, Trinity Reformed United Church of Christ, here in Bloomsburg. I studied at Lancaster Theological Seminary and received my Master's of Divinity there, and was a licensed minister prior. The United Church of Christ had a licensing program. So I was licensed to a single setting. So I was licensed to one church at a time. And so I was able to actually work as a minister while I was going to seminary, which of course helped out with the cost of seminary and such. So it worked out really nice. I was getting on-the-job experience and being educated at the same time regarding theological studies. So basically, I started back in 2000. I was licensed in 2004. So I've been doing this for about 17 years now. I was ordained in 2010. So I have about 11 years of ordained ministry. So I'm enjoying it. My wife, Dawn, is a big part of the ministry. She's been helping me with everything from getting church set up to reading scripture and so on and so forth. And now she's handling all of the video equipment for our live stream.
Speaking of that, I mean, most people view church as Sunday morning, Saturday morning and afternoon, actually going to a physical location, sitting down at a pew and having a actual physical service. I mean, we can all guess why churches might have gone to a streaming in the last couple months or maybe about a year now with the whole pandemic. How was that shift and change?
Well, the fact was we really had no choice. If we wanted to continue to have a ministry at all or to have a church at all, we were going to have to adapt really, really quick. So when the governor did a lockdown where people were not allowed to come into church anymore, actually, I take that back. Churches had an exemption from day one. Churches could continue to meet if they wanted to, but most pastors were trying to be very responsible and follow the CDC guidelines as well as the Pennsylvania Department of Health guidelines as well. So most of us did shut down. So when we shut down, our last service was March 15th of 2020. And the following Sunday, we were live streaming. We were able to get it up and running very quickly. I had been the executive director of Pennsylvania Academy of Ministry, and which was taught the licensing curriculum, the program I was measured when I was a licensed minister. I was actually started to run the program that licensed laity, lay people from the pews, and they actually would take the classes. Well, it was a 3-year rotation. And unfortunately, if you missed a class, you'd have to wait till the next 3 years to take it again. So people get sick all the time or cars break down and they can't travel to where the class is being held. So I immediately implemented a recording. So we would live stream and record classes so that if someone missed, they could either watch the class, or if they didn't have transportation, they could actually live stream it at home and actually be involved in the class while I was doing. So I had all the equipment. So we just took that equipment, took it into the church, and we immediately began live streaming. So we actually, when I say we, our church council, which we call the consistory, our consistory and I truly believed that this was the end of our church. The pandemic was going to cause us to basically have to close. While we didn't have expenses with utilities and things like that, we still had a secretary. We still had my salary. We still had, to pay, electric and so, for the church. And with a lockdown, we were afraid that the offerings were no longer going to come in. If you can't come into church, and that's usually what happens, if you don't come into church, you don't give an offering. We had already set up online giving, and we had about 25% of our congregation already giving online. But this was going to be a whole different story. This meant that people were going to have to send in their offerings, or it meant they were going to have to sign up for online. Well, we were pretty sure, from past experience, this wasn't going to be good for us. But what we found out was when we started live streaming, we only had one camera and one mic. So I had to do everything from basically in front of the communion table. And our liturgist, those who assisted with the service, they could actually read their parts from home, and everybody could hear them. But that didn't help for the people who didn't have internet or weren't computer savvy, like a lot of our elderly. They weren't able to, come into the church. They didn't have, they didn't have internet. Some of the families did get them tablets and would help set them up on Sunday mornings so that they could actually watch the service. We actually purchased a cell phone with data so that we could give it to those people who didn't have service, so at least they could listen to it or even watch it on live stream. It'd be very small, but at least they could, they could see somebody standing there.
Now, is it most of your congregation elderly?
It was, but the demographics are starting to change. We have seen an increase in, I would say, the 29 to 30, 40-year-olds. We're not seeing, young, we're not seeing teenagers, obviously, or real young adults in their 20s, but we are seeing late 20s, early 30s, and in the 40s actually joining the church. And there's a reason for that. Yes, we had about five to six members who did not have internet and were unable to, see the service. You could call in on the phone, but unfortunately, the toll rates were astronomical. When you try to call on Zoom, one of the Zoom numbers to listen. If you did it by cell phone, you could do it by cell phone, and if you had a plan that had unlimited long distance, there was no problem. You could actually do that. So some of our elderly did have cell phones for safety reasons, and so they were able to actually call in and at least listen to the service. And several of them did. Several of the five did. But I think there was only about one or two who truly didn't have access. We actually had, and this is what was surprising, we were not expecting a large number of people online. Normal attendance in church was anywhere from 35 to 55 people. And it ranged anywhere in between there, just depending on the Sunday, if it was raining, cold, whatever. So we immediately started off with an audience of 60 cameras. And we're looking at the people who are on camera, and we're noticing that these are couples. These are people who are couples. So out of the 60, we figured at least half of those 60 were two people, which meant we had an audience of almost 90 people. We were blown away. We were having anywhere from 70 to 90 people attending services every Sunday.
What's a typical in-house number?
35 to 55 was the normal. That would be the normal attendance in person, in-house. So we were actually having, more than our normal attendance, which completely blew us away. I think the highlight of the whole thing was our Christmas Eve service. Our Christmas Eve service that year, we went from March 22nd, through Christmas, with not being able to attend in person. Everything was still locked down. And we actually, on our Christmas Eve service, we had 90 cameras on, watching for the Christmas Eve service. We had people from London, England. We had people from Australia. We had a person from Italy, Germany, Colorado, Wyoming, Florida, and then the Lehigh Valley down Allentown. we had an unbelievable, international presence, which we never expected. We have friends in Australia and we have friends in London. And we had a friend of ours who just moved to Germany. So we understood why they were coming on board. But there were others that we just could not believe. So the online presence, because nobody could get to church, the only way to continue any type of a spiritual journey or a spiritual walk was to, in fact, watch online. And, we know the televangelists do a very good job at that, on TV. So we found that we were able to do the same thing. The other part of that was we truly expected our offerings to really decrease, and they didn't. At the very end of the year was the first time after the first of the year is a normal time in the church anyway that offerings kind of begin to decrease, and sure enough, we saw that. But at the same time, at the end of the year, we have a whole bunch of things that we have to pay for. There's all the end of the year stuff. So that was the only time that we got close. I think we had like $200 in the checking account. We went, ooh, this is not good. But it was because we had to pay a whole bunch of bills, payroll taxes and things like that, all at the end of the year. But by the end of January, we're right back up to normal. So we have been very much what we would say blessed by the congregation, by our members who truly supported the church and the ministry of what we do. Trinity is not just a church to go worship at. Trinity is what we refer to as a mission church. So as a mission church, we want to make sure that we reach out to the community. We work with the community. So Trinity is very much involved with Agape, which is a faith-based organization that helps the low-income and poverty-level people in our community. And they do a lot of educational work as well. We also do some educational work with a crock-pot ministry where we actually give people crock-pots with food and recipes and then show them how to use them so that single mothers can make a meal in the morning and go to work, get the kids off to school, come back home and have a hot meal at night. And then she can portion it out for leftovers for later in the week. So we do those type of educational things. We also have a little book house out front. We work with the Bloomsburg Ministerium. We provide housing for transient people who are passing through the area. Maybe their car broke down. We actually will put them up overnight. And we are very active with Protestant campus ministries that are here at Bloomsburg University. In fact, I'm the board president right now. So we work with the students of the university who are interested in religion. We have 2 that are going to seminary this year. And of course, we invite them to actually preach at the church and get experience. We have them come and do different services and such. So again, we become an educational aspect. We have what we call benevolences, and benevolence is where we support the local ambulance. We support the Ministerium Agape. We support different organizations here in town, as well as UCC facilities like Phoebe Home, which is a nursing home down in Allentown, which is a UCC nursing home. We also support Bethany Children's Home, which is a UCC orphanage. And of course, we support Lancaster Theological Seminary, which is a UCC seminary. We are very much involved doing fundraisers for missions, not necessarily to keep ourselves afloat. The offerings are what keep us afloat. The missions and the fundraisers are done to be able to help our community. So I have a pastor's discretionary fund. So if somebody comes to me who is in really desperate need of help, I can help them out. We can give them food cards, gift cards for Giant or Weiss food markets. We can give them. I also have the ability to give them cash for certain things when people are having difficulties. So there's a lot of that becomes a mission church, and that is what is attractive right now. And that's why I say we are starting to see a change in our demographics. People want a church that is doing something, that's contributing to the community, not just hoarding their money, not just fixing their own building, taking care of a building. They want a church that is actually being involved in what's going on around town, helping those who need help, following Christ's command to love your neighbor. And that's what we're finding the young adults are eager to find. Our service is very conservative, really. It's a very traditional service. And the young adults love it because it reminds them when they were kids and when they went to church. It kind of reminds them of going to church with their grandmother or their mom and dad and hearing those types of what we call liturgy, which is just the order of service, the confessional, the confession that we do, the blessing and commission, the call to worship, the offertory, all those different things, the Gloria Patri, all those things. It just reminds them of their youth and the good times they had. So they like the traditional service, but they want a church that's doing something. And this is where Trinity took a major step in becoming an open and affirming church. And an open and affirming church means that there are 8 categories that we affirm. And that is age, gender, race, ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic, LGBT, and transgender identity. So anyone who falls in those categories, we affirm their right to worship God on their terms, and we welcome them in. So it doesn't matter what age you are. We don't put our elderly out to pasture. Okay. We use our elderly for their wisdom. We use our youth for their energy, and we involve them in the consistory. We have a college student right now who is on our consistory, on our church council. Same way women have the same rights as men in the church. And at Trinity, it's even, you can see that quite a bit. It's the women who are the leadership, do most of the leadership. Our past consistory president was Penny Johnson, and Penny, not only being female, but also of the LGBT community. And her wife is also a member with our church. And they are extremely active in the outreach committee and running the trunk or treat and doing the festivals and right on down the line. So those are the types of things that we just do. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, socioeconomic status, you're welcome here. Whether you have a disability, we are completely accessible at the church. We have a ramp for the people who can get into worship, into Jubilee Hall. We have stair chairs that they can get downstairs. So we are completely accessible. And we just, same way with ethnicity. We don't care whether you're German, Italian, Hispanic. It doesn't make any difference. You're welcome. And that's what we say. UCC's motto is, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. And that truly is what open and affirming means.
Well, I mean, even speaking about the life's journey and then talking about Helen and Penny, I did that article probably about a year ago now. Yep. And Helen and Penny were literally on a journey trying to find a church that would welcome them in, and they tested some grounds with other churches, but then they found Trinity formed, and they definitely felt at home. I mean, at least when they started, even from what they said, yeah, not everybody agreed with it, but
they were respected.
Yeah, and over time, they saw that your sexual identity or your sexuality, who you love or like or whatever, doesn't define who you are. So they ended up growing to even look at life differently.
Absolutely,
After meeting Penny and Helen and meeting others like them, and I mean, as the church grew, I mean, it changed. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, at that time, which I think was back in 2013, Penny and Helen could not get married in the church at that time, so they had to get married outside of the church. But shortly after that,
right,
especially when you started at the church, that changed.
Correct.
Rather quick.
Yeah, it was one of the conditions of my being hired was that I could do same-sex marriages. I would not accept employment if, one, I wasn't able to teach the open and affirming curriculum, and two, I had to be able to do same-sex marriages, and consistory approved that. And so I began.
Were they reluctant to approve it, or was it real quick?
Not at all. Nope, they were not reluctant at all. They were happy to. The only thing they asked was, we don't care if you teach it, but just don't jam it down our throats. That was basically the commentary was, we want to learn, we want to understand, just don't jam it down our throats. Help us to grow. And that's exactly what we did. We had a 3-year process where we went through teaching about open and affirming, hitting all the different categories, talking about age and gender and ethnicity and socioeconomic and disability and LGBT and transgender. We went through all those different areas and taught it for a 3-year period, and then took a congregational vote, and we had a 95% approval. We had three people in the congregation who voted no, but they felt comfortable to vote no, and I think that says a lot. Too often, pastors will bully their congregations into voting the way they want them to vote, and here we had a situation where the people who were truly, it wasn't they weren't against LGBT people, they were against gay marriage. And that was why they voted no for open and affirming, because the gay marriage was their stumbling block. The one man came up to me and said, he goes, I have nothing against it, but I know my mother, who was a matriarch in the church, would roll over in her grave if I voted for it. He goes, I was just raised that, gay marriage is not, is not appropriate. But yet he had no problem with Penny and Helen at all. It was just the idea of gay marriage. And that was the only thing that they were voting against. It wasn't voting against being open and affirming. It was voting against gay marriage.
Now, kind of expanding on the gay marriage. I mean, you and I have talked over the years about this. I mean, I grew up, as well, I grew up Christian. I grew up Catholic. I was more or less taught that gay marriage, homosexuality was wrong.
Right.
Because, I mean, at least in Catholicism, one of the main teachings or one of the main goals is procreate.
Yes.
That's what I find interesting, is that when it comes to homosexuality or gay marriage, especially in religion, more times than not, it's because of the whole idea of procreation, of bringing new life in the world. It's more or less not because of that the people cannot be together or whatever. Well, but it's almost an underlining thing that it's like, well, in the Bible, it states man and women procreate, they have offspring, and that's how it,
right.
There's tons of stories.
Right. But you have to remember, back in the ancient world, it was an agrarian society. So if you were going to be a successful producer of fruits, vegetables, whatever, you're growing, you have to have people to tend the farm. Well, the easiest way to do that was to have kids. The more kids you had, the more successful your farm could be. So literally, procreation became a life and death situation. Because if you didn't have kids, you basically were not going to be successful, or you're going to have to pay someone to help you farm, which means your profits are going to be even lower. So this became, back in the biblical days, this became a matter of life and death. You needed to procreate. You needed to have children in order to be successful. And in fact, wealth was determined by how many goats, sheep, kids you had. That was what determined your success.
I mean, that was the monetary system.
Correct. That was monetary. And of course, back then, they had no concept of a man and a man or a woman and a woman having a consensual, loving relationship. You have to remember that Romans, when they would go in and invade and this was not just the Romans, but there was others, when they would go in and invade a foreign country, they would rape the men. They would sodomize the men to make women out of them, to humiliate them, to make them less than, so that they could control the land and control this, the populace. So all they knew was rape. All they knew was violence when it came to male on male or woman on woman. It was either violence or it was simply for self-gratification. This idea of a loving, consensual relationship, they had no concept of. So it was either for gratification or it was for violence. And so that wasn't even thought about of back then. So when you look at the laws in the Deuteronomy and Leviticus, it's pretty much cut and dry, especially Leviticus. Leviticus was a priestly book. That means it laid out the rules for the priests of the temple. You could not have male prostitutes, or you could not fornicate. Priests had to hold themselves above at a much higher standard. And so there were male prostitutes back then. And it even says in the Bible, in Leviticus, you shout, male prostitutes, a man will not lay with another man or male prostitute. And the whole reason for it, again, is because it was seen as gratification. And the priests were to be held at a much higher level. The book of Leviticus was not for the congregation of Israel, meaning all the people. It was for the priestly tribe. And so people take Leviticus and say, see, it's against man on man and woman on woman is in a violation. It's a violation for the priests. Yeah, it's a violation of the priest, that priestly clan, you want to call it.
And as we all know, that didn't work out very well.
No.
In some religions.
Correct. And so we're seeing the same thing happen where in today's world, we're seeing the same thing. Priests who are not allowed to marry, who have to be celibate, are not able to control that. And in fact, we see this whole sex scandal go through the Catholic Church, which has severely hurt the Catholic Church, not just financially, but I think even it's still the largest church in the world. Still has the most members of any Christian denomination.
Actually, I did some research on that leading up to this as well. And Islam is actually increasing rapidly, and it's probably going to overtake Catholicism very soon if it keeps on going in that direction.
Correct. There is a interesting TED Talk by Jonathan Haidt, and he outlines what makes people be conservative and be liberal, and he's also relaying that to the whole idea of morals, what makes our moral standards. And part of that is this idea of purity. And Islam is very much a religion of purity when it comes to women. That's why they wear the veils. That's why they wear the hijabs. That's why, they're very, modest in dress, because that idea of having your body be pure to Allah, which is God. Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are the three religions that have a monotheistic. They're monotheistic. They all worship the same God, which is kind of comical. But yeah, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all worship the God of Abraham. The only difference is Islam, it was Ishmael, and for Christianity or Judaism, it was Isaac. Isaac was on the Jewish line, and Ishmael is on the Islamic line. And Hagar was the maid of Abraham, and Abraham slept with her because Sarah was barren. And after they had Ishmael, he would have been the rightful heir. But Sarah became pregnant with Isaac, and no. My son is going to be the heir. So they threw Hagar and Ishmael out, threw him in the desert to die. So people wonder, well, why is there this tension between Judaism and Islam? Well, it goes all the way back to the very beginnings, to the father Abraham.
Starts to sound like a soap opera drama there.
Certainly does. But it's what's interesting is that, religion has always been based on tribal. So you have people come together who believe the same things, who may have ethnic or racial commonalities. And so you see this with, denominations today. We're called Trinity Reformed because we are part of the German Reformed congregation. Those Germans who came to Pennsylvania and had made the Reformed Church. And so that's why we are Trinity Reformed. We were an E&R church, which was called Evangelical and Reformed. That's just Evangelical was another church denomination that joined with German Reformed to make the E&R church. And then eventually the Christian Congregationalist and the E&R churches joined to make the UCC, the United Church of Christ. Four different denominations came to make the UCC. But these clans were able to get together and compromise, and tribes get together and compromise. And so you see the tribe of Islam, you see the tribe of Christianity, you have the tribe of Judaism gather together. And this is what Jonathan Haidt was talking about in his TED Talk, was people tend to join together in common when they have common ground with others. If you're in my clan, we don't talk to the other clan that's over here on the other side of the road because they're not like us. So there's automatically this division. And then within the Christian denominations, there are so many Christian denominations because of different theological viewpoints. Catholics believe that the blood or the bread and the wine turn into the body and blood of Christ, literally. Lutherans believe that the Holy Spirit is within those elements. In the United Church of Christ, we look at it, it's a symbol. It's all it is a symbol. Nothing more, nothing less. So those are some of the divisions that, just as an example, when it comes to communion or the Eucharist, that separate those three denominations.
I mean, growing up Catholic, it always bugged me when it would always be taught to us that it turns into the body and blood. And it's like, there was always a thought in my head that we're cannibals. Because if you're literally meaning it is turning into the blood and body. Now, granted, I had one teacher, which this was before I started having major issues with Catholicism and religion in itself. She mostly taught us the sacraments. Up to, I believe, 5th grade, she taught us just the sacraments, school kids up to progress along the sacramental tree of. She even kind of put it that it's like, it doesn't literally change into it. It does more or less represent it.
Well, transubstantiation is the theological concept that it literally turns into. The Holy Spirit makes it turn into the bread and or body and blood of Christ as you eat it and drink it. That, and even that, you're right about cannibalism. When you talk about that, the disciples were having a real hard time with this because Jesus said, you must drink of my blood and you must eat of my body in order to be saved. And they were having a real hard time accepting this. And of course, the Pharisees and scribes then, of course, used this against Jesus eventually. Yeah, it's you have these different theological viewpoints. So you have all these different denominations. The Presbyterians are different from us because they have a certain style of government in there. So the Presbyterians are because it's a presbytery. It is an actual form of government. That's what makes a lot of there's almost no theological differences between the Presbyterian Church and the United Church of Christ, or even the Lutherans. So Lutherans, like I said, the only difference there, they believe the Holy Spirit is within the elements in that. So there are some minor theological. There were union churches where Lutherans and UCC joined in one church, and the Lutheran pastor would preach to the Lutheran and UCC people, and sometimes it would be a UCC pastor who would preach to both. Sometimes they had two of them, and they would week 1 and 3 was Lutheran, 2 and 4 were UCC, and it was called a union church. But two congregations, two denominations existed together in one church. And there are still some of those around, but most of them have broken apart and become, there are different denominations. It's very similar to, you see all these different theological differences. Well, no wonder, because I have a program called BibleWorks that I use. BibleWorks has 143 different translations of the Bible. The only thing that we have, meaning our society, the Catholic Church, theologians have, is what's called the Septuagint. The Septuagint is 70 books of the Bible that were written in Greek, and that's the only original text that we have. We do not have the original Hebrew Bible, which is the Old Testament, and we don't have those. We don't have the original text of the New Testament. What we do have is, when they put it all together in the Septuagint, those we have as original text. The only thing that we do have that is from original were from the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls had several books, and they found several fragments. And even today, they're still finding fragments of some of the old manuscripts. But we don't have a complete manuscript of the Old Testament, of the Jewish Bible. There's always been rumors that the Catholic Church has it stuck away in their archives where nobody can see it. They're the only ones who have it.
I mean, the Da Vinci Code series kind of makes it appealing that the Catholic Church has this gigantic vault
right
below the Vatican that houses all kinds of things. I mean, it is on record that the Vatican has a library or some type of storage facility that houses a lot of that stuff. I mean, I highly doubt that they're just going to keep all the, Pope's robes just out.
If I'm not mistaken, it is the Catholic Church that has the original manuscript for the Septuagint, I believe. I believe it was the Catholic Church has that. But that's the only original manuscript we have. So out of that, it's written in Greek. We know that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew and Aramaic. But we don't have the original. All we have is the Greek translation. So what happened was, when you try to translate Greek word for word, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
So the other thing you have to remember is that when they were looking at the Old Testament, even the Greek translators, there were no vowels in the Hebrew language.
Well, most of the languages don't translate
correct
verbatim to each other. I mean, it's very hard, and that's why there's so many different versions and so much confusion with just the Bible itself, is because it doesn't translate well into every single language.
When I hear someone say, well, the Bible says, I said, well, really? Well, which version?
I doubt it.
Yeah, exactly. The Bible doesn't say it. It's a translator who said it. And there has been a great deal of research by biblical scholars to look at the Septuagint and look at the Greek language. But whoever translated it into Greek, whoever did that original manuscript, and there were a lot of scribes who did that very carefully. The problem is that they had to make some decisions. They had to decide where to put certain vowels, in the Hebrew language. And if you didn't put them in the right place, or you didn't get the right one, it could mean a different word. So you'd always have footnotes explaining that this could be this or it could be that. And we see it today in most study Bibles. Most study Bibles have really extensive category of footnotes that explain why this was translated this way, and it could in fact mean this or that and the other thing. So there is just a phenomenal amount of work that has been done to translate the Bible into not just English, but of course all the different languages, but also there are different versions of the Bible that take a more contemporary look at it, take a more word for word look at it. The one that there is a Bible that they actually did it word for word from the Greek, and when you read it, it doesn't make any sense. You have to move the words around, because it's kind of like Spanish. You put the verb, has an ending which is we. So trabamos is we work. Well, the amos on the end is we, but in order for us to say that in English, we put the we before work. We work, where it's work we. So it's the same thing in Greek. So what happens is they have to rearrange that. The Revised Standard Version is the one that took the word for word and then put it in the right, put it in a progression that we could understand. From that became the New Revised Version, New Revised Standard Version, an RSV. And that is considered one of the more, I would say, one of the more prominent translations used by seminaries and biblical scholars and so on and so forth. There are the NIV, the New International Version, which are very good. But all these different translations are looking at different ways to translate from the Greek. But again, without having the original Hebrew manuscript, or Aramaic, or having the original Greek manuscript of the New Testament, you have to trust the translators who put it into the Septuagint, and the Septuagint has been copied multiple times.
Now, speaking of the versions, though, many religions adopted certain books and certain versions. Like, Catholicism took King James Version, correct?
They originally did, yes, and I think some of their Bibles have been translated over to, or have been converted over to either New Revised Standard Version or one of the other versions. I don't think they use the King James because that was just it's Old English and it's very hard to understand. But
and I mean, even when it was adopted into it to create Catholicism, the creation of it was almost rigged in itself, because when all those books were kind of brought together, they just picked and choose whichever ones they wanted.
Correct. And
instead of branching out to the other translation or the other books that might contradict or might kind of go into a little bit more in depth, they picked and chose what books they wanted, which...
Well, and in fact, the Protestant Bible is different from the Catholic Bible. The Catholic Bible includes books between the Old Testament and the Old and New Testament called the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha has books like Tobit, the Maccabees, and so on and so forth. There's Judith. There's different books in there that the Catholic Church has adopted as the canon. A canon, of course, is just a grouping of books. And so that's their canon. They put the Apocrypha. The Protestant Church removed it. They don't use those. The Maccabees aren't found in the Protestant Bible. Like the Bible that I use is called the New Oxford Annotated Bible, and it has the Apocrypha in it, but it's in a separate area between the New and Old Testaments. And the reason, because there are some really weird stories. There are some very weird stories in some of those books, and so when King James basically put together this committee, 72 scholars, to put together the books of the Bible, they picked the Old and New Testament as we know it today without the Apocrypha. And that's, he decided as king, that's what's going to be, it's written in Old English. The Catholic Church, on the other hand, said, no, these books we want to include. But what was funny is that neither one of them included the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Peter. There are actually other extra canonical books written by, like, the Apostle Peter. So the Gospel of Peter never got in. And the Gospel of Thomas, one of the disciples, never got in. The Gospel of Thomas is really neat because it talks about Jesus in his youth. We only have one story in the Bible about Jesus at 12 years old. That's where he stays behind when they go to Jerusalem. He stays behind when the rest of the family all headed back to Nazareth. And they had to go back and get him because he was sitting in the temple with all the teachers, listening and answering and asking questions and such. And they were amazed at his, prowess.
Original Home Alone.
There you go, original Home Alone, exactly. But so that's the only story we have in the Bible. But in the Gospel of Thomas, there is a whole host. And one of the reasons that they do not include Gospel of Thomas is because there's a story where Jesus is playing at the river, making doves out of clay and then making them alive. And they fly away. And the little boy comes over. He wants one of the doves. And it keeps pestering Jesus. So Jesus kills him, touches him and kills him. And of course, the father runs to Joseph and, is throwing a fit. Your son just killed my boy. So Joseph runs down, tells Jesus, bring him back to life. So Jesus brings him back to life. So you can see why that Gospel Thomas is not included in the Bible, because it shows that Jesus had a temper and he actually sinned. He killed somebody. Now, as a child under the age of 12, you're not accountable to those. But they didn't care.
No, but it's still not nice to
Exactly.
kill people.
Right.
But I mean, it also seems very outlandish.
Right.
You're looking at almost like magic or something.
Correct. Well, and if you look at a lot of the, if you truly look at the miracles of Jesus, they do appear magical at times.
And a little bit of an alcohol problem, turning water into
about 120,
wine.
it was 120 some gallons. 6 stone jars were about 35 stone jars held 6 gallons each. It's like 30 gallons. It ended up being about 120 some gallons of wine that he changes. Changing water into wine, making the mute and deaf speak and hear, the blind seeing.
Yeah,
we know that, and then feeding 5,000. The story of the feeding of the 5,000, I think, is the most interesting one. And the reason for that is because...
Isn't it just bread and fish?
There's 5 loaves and 2 fish. Feeds 5,000 people. And what biblical scholars believe happened was you didn't go out into the wilderness. Okay, it was right before Passover. So if you're going to be going to Passover, what did you carry? You had to take bread with you and wine. And probably if you're going to go out into the wilderness, you're going to take provisions with you. So Jesus has everybody sit down on the grass in groups. And this little boy offers his bread and fish to Jesus to feed. So what ends up happening is everybody sits down. Well, when you sit down, Jesus takes all the bread and the fish, blesses them, breaks them, and then distributes them. Everyone who's sitting in groups all begin to share their food with each other. And they only eat what they need to make them full. And the rest is gathered up into 12 baskets. Jesus did have a miracle. He got people who didn't even know each other to actually extend love towards someone else that they didn't know, that they weren't kin to, and may even been, from the different, side of the tracks. Might have been a Samaritan. But here he has everybody sitting down and everybody shares. The miracle is that it was the ability to get people to love one another, which is, of course, Jesus' commandment. Love God and love neighbor. So Jesus was able to get people to love one another who may not even been family or anybody they knew. So, but the way the story is told, it's like Jesus snaps his fingers and food just appears, magic. And I don't buy that. We know the Bible is written in metaphor. So many times there's an allegory and metaphor. And we know that because of some of the stories. But when Jesus compares a fig tree to something else, or this to that. And when he makes someone see, were you blind spiritually and he made you see? Were you deaf spiritually, meaning you did not, you couldn't even hear the scriptures and he, made them hear? Bringing people back to life, was it because he renewed their spiritual life?
Yeah. Like they lost their way,
Correct.
High depression and
Exactly.
stuff like that,
So,
and they brought them back to almost a normalcy.
Right. I think when we try to make Christ or God into a magician, I think we're doing a disservice. Do I think that there are natural phenomenon that God has set in motion that we can tap into? For instance, there's a story of manna when the Israelites leave Pharaoh and they're in the desert and they have nothing to eat. Each morning they would find manna on the ground, and manna was a white, flaky substance, and you could gather it up and actually eat it like bread. Well, there is a insect in that region of the world that goes to a particular tree and eats of its sap and then discharges a white flaky substance that surrounds the tree. But it's a natural occurring, be like bees and honey. It's very similar to bees and honey. So it's a natural occurring thing of nature that God has provided and the Israelites were able to take advantage of that on their trek. So,
but if you don't discuss further that insect or make mention of that insect, then it does sound very magical.
And back then, they may not have known that it was an insect that was providing it.
Yeah.
But the fact is that God created that insect, and that was there. Certainly is a miracle in itself. Talk about resurrection. The whole concept of resurrection. Look at nature. In the springtime, everything comes to life. Mm-hmm. That was dead in the winter comes to life. Then you have your life in the fall. The leaves start falling. You start seeing the everything going dormant, and in the winter everything is dormant. It dies, and then spring comes back to life. And that whole circle of resurrection and life, or death and resurrection being revived. So it's a natural phenomenon that we can see in nature, and there are so many parallels to nature and God that if you really take time to look, this whole concept of God is not a foreign thing. And in fact, one of the things that I preach about is that the Bible itself tells stories about relationship between us and God, and relationship between each other. The first 4 of the 10 commandments are commandments between us and God. The last 6 are commandments between each other. Don't steal, don't murder, don't lie, don't covet, all that. So if you look at the book, you look at the Bible, and you read the Bible, it's all about relationship. It's about human nature. Gluttony, greed, pride, all those things that destroy. And when you have love, compassion, nurture, it builds up. And so when you look at the Bible that way, when you look at religion that way, you look at Christ and his teachings, and even God's commandments in the Old Testament, it is all based on relationship. It's all based on this idea of human nature and sticking together and caring for each other. And when you look at our world today and the divisiveness that we have right now, we need religion more now than we ever did. But unfortunately, you have religions that take advantage of people, that are extremely on the right or extremely on the left. And it's my way or the highway. Mm-hmm. And when you have religions like that, the extremist, that's when you have real issue. It is when you have religions or churches that are teaching love, caring, compassion, nurture, honor, respect, dignity. When you see that, that's a church you want to go to. When you see a church that's actually doing something in the community, that's where you want to be. These churches that are on the extremes, and Christianity has it. We had Eric Rudolph, who was a proclaimed Christian, killing abortion doctors. The KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, was a Christian organization. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's not like Islam has a corner on extremism. Christianity has just as much. And you look at the Crusades, same Inquisition, same things. So religion can be perverted. It can be used for political agendas, for personal agendas. But
we see that to this day in politics. Many politicians, right. Even our presidents, and I won't go into which one, but many of them claim that they are high Christians, right. And they love church, but yet they don't act like it.
Correct.
They exclude certain groups or certain people, or when it comes right down to helping others, they forget all about church.
Yep. And that's that goes right back to that whole idea of using religion for a personal or political agenda, and we see that across religion. Sometimes I've heard it said we'd be better off without religion, and because religion is a man-made item. It's an ability. Religion is based on the ability to collect together as clans, as tribes, to be in communion with people who are of like minds. And of course, when that happens, the hell with everybody else. All we care about is our own clan.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem comes in. Though this whole coexist movement is excellent. That's where we should be. We should be able to coexist. You have your beliefs and I respect you for that. And I have my beliefs and you respect me for that. We can coexist in a peaceful, common dialogue. One of the things I find very interesting and very hopeful is here in Bloomsburg, we have a ministerium, which is about 38 churches in the Bloomsburg area. And we meet on a monthly basis. Now, the Presbyterian Church, the UCC Church, the Lutheran Church, the Methodist Church, even the Community of Christ Church, many of those churches are what I would call progressive. We have a lot of independent churches like Shiloh Bible Church. We have a couple Lutheran churches that are very conservative. We have a Southern Baptist, Bloomsburg Southern Baptist, very conservative in their theology. We are 180 degrees apart when it comes to LGBT, but yet the Southern Baptist preacher and myself are good friends. We can come together as a group and we can respect one another, we can hear each other's arguments, and we can listen. And we all agree on the love of Christ. We may not agree on the LGBT theology that I hold, or the progressives hold. That's okay. We can coexist because they believe what they believe, I believe what I believe, but yet we respect one another as long as we're not harming someone. That's the only caveat. If the Southern Baptists were doing something to hurt the LGBT community, that's where I would step up and say, hey, that's a problem. But they don't. They don't. They don't do anything to hurt them. They just don't agree with the gay marriage because of the biblical standards and theology that they hold. So that's where we need to be, not only as a Christian religion, but as a nation. We need to be able to respect our Islamic brothers and sisters. We need to be able to respect our Jewish brothers and sisters. We need to be able to respect our Catholic, our Protestant brothers and sisters, and be able to come together to do what needs to be done for the community, for those who do not have what we have. That is what Jesus railed against, was the Pharisees and the scribes who did things for their own personal agendas, for their own personal benefits. They took the best seats at the banquets. They prayed on the street corner so everybody could see them. They actually cheated people in the temple with the money exchange, temple currency for Roman coins. And that's exactly what we have in our society today. Jesus kept talking about love of neighbor. He used the Samaritan, the good Samaritan. Samaritans were lowlifes. They were half-breeds. They were despised by the Jewish people. And Jesus uses them as the prime example of what a good neighbor truly is, the good Samaritan. So Jesus uses what society considered lowlife as the hero of his story. This is the model and the example that we are to follow today. We are to look at those who do not have much and be there for them and help them out. Now, people, that's socialism. That's socialism. Well, it's funny. It's socialism, and it's socialism up until the point that someone else is getting the money. But when they get the money, it's no longer socialism.
Well, not to riff too long on socialism, but right. I mean, the idiotic misconception with socialism is that, at least in the United States, how many organizations or how many policies do we have that are actually socialist?
Right.
A good number.
Absolutely.
And it's like, all right, if you want to get rid of socialism, then literally one of the first things that should pop up in your head is this thing called Social Security.
Right.
Get rid of Social Security, get rid of disability, get rid of Medicare and Medicaid.
Well,
get rid of
your entire interstate system. You should be paying tolls
roads,
for every road you get on. You should be paying a toll just to get on the roads.
Even taxes in itself is a small form of socialism, and it's like a lot of people are not viewing it. Now, do I think we need to be 100% socialist? No, but there are good things and bad things. I mean, I don't think any nation out there is a 100% without fault or without its problems.
Well, it's just like you were saying just a moment ago, that we have so many political leaders who claim to be Christian. And yet when you look at Jesus and the disciples, Judas held the common purse. Anybody who had money put it in the common purse, and Judas held that money to buy their food, to buy their lodging, to buy whatever they needed, to take care of people along the way that they ran into, and so on and so forth. So Jesus models a socialistic form of a clan or of a tribe, group of disciples. So you have these politicians who rail against social programs, and yet it's exactly what Jesus is calling for, and they claim themselves to be Christian. Excuse me, but that's exactly what Jesus railed against, was the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. And we have the same exact thing 2,000 years later. And that's what I love about the Bible. You can read a story in the Bible and you can show that it's the same damn thing is happening 2,000 years later. We're still it's human nature. We're still following the same models. And that's human nature. It's exactly what the Bible warns us about. Yeah. These are the things that we've got to be careful.
Well, I mean, a good majority of the world models itself after the Bible with its religion. So I mean, it's definitely easy to see why things are repeating itself over and over. And I don't think it's ever gonna change. I don't know if getting rid of religion is good or bad. Regardless if it's good or bad, it's not going to happen. At least to me, religion is a cultural thing. You would have to get rid of cultures. You would have to get rid of certain ethnic groups and certain people to almost have either one single culture or no culture, which would mean get rid of special foods, music, art. You have to get rid of a whole lot of things just to pretty much dull society down.
Well, here's the interesting part, though. In almost every religion in the world, practically every religion in the world has the golden rule and uses that part of their religion. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Mm-hmm. And that is across almost every single religion. If you look at Islam, Christianity, Catholicism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shinto, right down the line.
Surprisingly, even Satanists, they don't seek out to do harm to people.
Well, Catholic Church has always used the Bible as a form of behavior modification. So this fear of going to hell and sin has always been a way to try to get the masses to maintain a certain moral and ethical standard. I don't think the Catholic Church was being malicious in its attempt to use the Bible as a form of behavior modification, but in all honesty, that's what they did. So these threats, these threats of going to hell, turn people off. I think the hope right now is that we're seeing, we saw mainline churches, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Methodist, UCC, actually have a decline in membership. It's been across the board. This is that you've seen decline in these churches. Even the Catholic Church had a slight decline, but still not near what the other mainline churches did. But what we're seeing now is we're actually starting to see these 29 to 35s come back to church. These are people who are usually getting married, having kids. They want them baptized. They want them in Sunday school. They want them to have a moral and ethical standard. But they also want to be involved in churches that are doing something in the community. They want their kids to know that it is appropriate to work together and to help other people. So this whole idea of love their neighbor, they want to see churches that are doing that. So where we started to see, people don't see church as relevant anymore. They don't necessarily think that some churches aren't doing a great job, but overall, it's not relevant to my life. Yet, if you took the time, and this is the thing that kind of upsets me about religion. There's a book by Jack Good called The Dishonest Church. And what it is it's about pastors who go to seminary. They learn all this wonderful information. And when they come back to their congregations, they don't teach it because they're afraid if they do, they're going to get fired. So this whole idea of atonement, which is the forgiveness of sin. Atonement means forgiveness of sin. There are like 13 different means of forgiveness in the Bible, what they call 13 theories of atonement. And these are stories in the Bible where God has forgiven or Christ has forgiven somebody on a basis of love, on the basis of not this substitutionary. The church always taught substitutionary atonement, which is where Jesus goes on the cross. All of our sins are put on him, past, present, and future. And he is judged, is killed. So he is a sacrifice for our sins, or substitutional atonement. Jesus is our substitute. And so he is killed and then, of course, is resurrected. So now we have forgiveness of sin and eternal life. These are the two things Jesus brings us. But yet there are other ways of forgiveness. Jesus did not have to die on the cross in order for us to be forgiven. Substitutionary atonement is not the only way to be forgiven, but nobody teaches that, or very few people teach that. And this is where the young adults who are coming back are loving it when they have preachers who are actually teaching the things that they learned in seminary. When they are coming back to their congregations and teaching this, the congregations now are becoming educated. They are understanding metaphor. They're understanding the Bible. They're understanding how it was written. They're understanding the historic significance of the Bible and the whole history of the Jewish people and all this. So it makes a big deal. And now we're starting to see young adults coming back to mission churches. Churches, what are called mission churches, are churches that are actually doing something in the community. And that's when we're starting to see now a resurgence of people coming back to church.
Now, would you say, though, that it's because the younger people are more receptive to change than the older? Because if the pastors are coming in with brand new information, or brand new information at least different than what they were perhaps taught, and maybe they view it as more of the truth or more of a realization, do you think that's why they are more receptive into coming to church or joining more organizations that are more involved with outside of the church experience?
I certainly think that's a part of it. I do. I think that's what what we're seeing is that the younger generation, change is a little easier for them to deal with. However, what we do know is that conservative mindsets don't like to change too much. Liberal mindsets don't mind change, but conservative, they like the status quo. But what we're seeing is there's less hypocrisy. Churches that are teaching the truth, okay, meaning they're teaching the truth about the Bible and what the biblical scholars, it's like I teach from a commentary, which is what biblical scholars put out that says this is what this scripture means. That's what I preach, and that's what I teach. Because these guys have 30, 40, 50 years of research, of much more education than I have. And they're able to they know the original languages, they tear it apart, they look to see what is, the historical standpoint was in perspective. They look at all these different, what's really funny is in the Bible, you can actually find patterns. You'll find A, B, B, C, C, D, C, C, B, B, A. So A and A match, the two B's match, the two C's match, and the D is in the center. And it's actually a literary tool that the writers of the Bible use. And it's a way of getting people to understand when they hear that, because remember, it was always done by hearing. Most of the people back in the ancient world did not read. So when you heard a story that was in a pattern, it was easier to understand. And these writers of the Bible use these patterns. Well, you don't hear, most of the Bible churches preaching that. I preach that. I let our people see it, because now they're seeing that there is much more to the Bible than just doctrine. There is literary skill. There's a historical background. There is, contextual background. It really makes the scriptures alive. It makes them understandable, because now you can actually relate them to what's going on today.
Well, I mean, back then, though, I mean, only the educated
Correct.
was able to read, write, and all that, and that's why they relied on priests and pastors. Instead of educating the people, you just dictated and told them what was the truth, which,
Correct.
at least in my opinion, led to a lot of this disillusion of the Bible and how it was written, because you never had the common folk educated.
Right.
They were just blindly told, this is how it is.
Correct.
And when people wanted to be educated, they were either imprisoned, killed, or just looked down upon because they're the poor.
Well, and that's one of the big arguments with college right now. You see it. You can see it even in our paper. There's where college students are being taught to think, be critical thinkers, to actually question. And for the old guard, let's call them the old guard, the conservative people out there, they don't want people thinking for themselves. They want to be told what is what. They don't want to have to figure it out on their own. Liberals tend to want to figure it out. They want to ask those questions. They want to question authority. They want to question the Bible. And the old guard says, "Oh, no, you don't question that. We're told this is what it is, and this is what it is. That's it. No questions. Don't be a critical thinker. Don't question the Bible. Don't question a pastor." The old hair pastor, where the pastor had the last word in everything. Well, we don't do that at Trinity. I don't have the last word. I don't run the church. I am their spiritual leader. That's my job. The consistory is the governing body of the church, and they make the rules. And that's what we're seeing, more critical thinkers now coming into these progressive churches like ours, and we're starting to see membership actually includes, like we said, isn't your church a lot of elderly? Well, it was, but now we're starting to see that demographic actually switch. We're actually seeing those 60 and over, not being morbid, but they're dying off. Where under 60, between 60 and 30, we're seeing more joining the church and becoming more active. Even the 70s, the people in their 70s are becoming more active in the church. And a lot of it is because you're seeing people like Mark Reisinger over at the Methodist Church, Tormod, Svensson at the table. You're seeing these different pastors, progressive pastors, really promoting this idea of coexist, this idea of getting along, this idea of being truthful, being honest, respecting and loving each other, and being truthful with the gospel. Not just running with the party line, actually allowing people to think for themselves and discover the scriptures for themselves. So, I'm really, I'm pleased with where we're at. The pandemic has made things much different. We will never stop live streaming now. Now that we've started, we'll never stop. We'll continue even when we're back in person again, because I have a congregational member who actually lives in Florida permanently, and he has a boat, and all the churches down there don't start until 10:30. We start at 9:00. So he can watch us online at 9 to 10 and be out on the boat by 10:30, where he won't be able to get out. He won't be able to get till almost 12 noon before he can get out on the water. So he loves it. We have people in Wyoming who are tuning in almost every week. I have people in the Lehigh Valley who are tuning in every week. So even though we get back together and open the church back up again, we will continue live streaming because it allows us to do an outreach, more of an outreach of people who want to hear, they want to learn, because I don't feel like I preach as much as I teach. I give the background and the material and then relate it to our present day. And,
well, I mean, even with just physical churches, you could only spread your message or spread your teaching or spread your influence within that city limits.
Correct.
But now with the advent of social media and online streaming and all that, literally, I mean, yeah, we have friends that live in Australia that tune in, but still, they pass the message on to other people. Other people in Australia might tune in, and it's a global, a global thing. I mean, literally, people in all kinds of countries around the world can
tune into a church or a live stream that's located in a very, very small town, the reaching of that is so much greater.
Right. And they can experience a different style and methodology of preaching the gospel. And that's, I think, remarkable. Now people have an opportunity. They can listen to, a Lutheran pastor, a Methodist pastor, a UCC pastor. They can, check out different ones and find that message that really connects with them. And that's what we want to do. That's what we hope to see, people getting the message that speaks to them, that lifts them spiritually, that makes them the better self, and treat other people with love and respect and kindness. And that's, I think, our goal in all this.
Well, and with that message, I think that'll wrap it up.
Sounds great.
Where could people reach out? If people would like to reach out to your church, where can they find you?
They can find us at www.trinityreformeducc.org. And there'll be links to the online, the live streaming from there, and you can see the things there. You can also go to Facebook at Trinity UCC on Facebook, and look for Bloomsburg, Trinity UCC in Bloomsburg, and it'll bring you to our website as well, or our Facebook page, and our sermons are there as well. So we're both on Zoom and Facebook for those who want to join us online.
That's a wrap on this episode from All Over Entertainment. Thanks for tuning in, and check out the Facebook page for more writings, podcasts, and videos. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Also, you can click the link to the Discord page and be a part of the entertainment community. Thank you again, and see you next time.